fools don't know what's right from wrong, but somehow those folks belong.
When I look around, I see that everything is just fine in the world, just hunky-dory. But if I take a closer look, then it begins. The roads are full of potholes, the toilets are blocked again, ambulances come too late to save people, the streets are strewn with litter, and there are even cracks in the ceiling. But when I turn on the TV, then you really have it. Nothing but disaster and catastrophe.
Habitaciones y salones del Costa Concordia.
South Korea on Monday confirmed the recent toxic chemical leak in Gumis.
Танцующий мост убивает водителей.
Космический корабль выведет на орбиту 3 спутника российских навигационных. Но что-то, кажется, идет не так.
Why is this the way things are? We are supposed to be living in an era of progress, with robots making more robots while we fly to outer space. Life should be getting easier and even more fun. But alas, no. For some reason, everything keeps going off the rails. Why? I tried to find an answer. I thought long and hard, and suddenly I had an epiphany. It came to me during a visit to my dentist, when he mistakenly pulled out a healthy tooth. Of course, he apologized profusely, saying, "Oh, you must forgive me. I mean, I did pull a healthy tooth. But you have to understand, I always wanted to be a violinist. I love music so much." But it is just too late for me to learn, and now I have to spend my life digging around in other people's mouths. If only you knew how much I hate it. This is when the thought hit me. Perhaps it was the physical pain, who knows. I instantly understood that most people are simply not following their natural vocations, their callings. I decided to ascertain how justified my intuition was, and this is what I discovered. The waiter who keeps you waiting and eventually brings the wrong order actually wanted to be a boxer, and his mind was busy rethinking some match or other. The girl in the bank who mixed up my documents used to perform in a strip club, where she had the time of her life. But now she has to spend her days shuffling papers. The lad at the garage can't stop thinking about how to take his avatar to a new level in some virtual world. And this means he is incapable of changing your oil in the real universe. Meanwhile, your plumber ripped the thread off your pipe out of sheer disgust with the fact that he always wanted to be a chess grandmaster. I went online to see why exactly there was a gas explosion and why a bridge collapsed. It turns out that the people responsible for safe construction were just not meant to be there. One dreamed of propagating roses, another had failed to get into medical university, a third would only be happy as a hairdresser. Moreover, the civil servant in charge of monitoring the whole shebang was appointed for completely obscure reasons. He was previously a furniture salesman, so there we have it. People not following their true vocation. But just a moment. The trains are still running, planes are flying, the stores are open, the steelworks are working flat out, houses are being built. People do not have to love their jobs to keep on doing them. And some people do actually love their work. We do not all pine away because we can't be singers or artists. So who are these people who lay pipelines back to front or asphalt in mud? Perhaps they are simply obeying erroneous instructions. Like one writer said, "When the shepherd is a fool, his dog will be one too." But where do these inept bosses come from? I decided to go and see what the clever people say about this, and found some fascinating theories. For example, a treatise called The Peter Principle, Why Things Always Go Wrong. Light bulb. The thing is, any organization is built as a hierarchy, and people take their positions on a ladder. You can rise up from infantryman to general, from lowly worker to factory foreman. In a hierarchical structure, there is constant movement. But why are there inept managers? Because according to Lawrence J. Peter, in any hierarchy, employees tend to be promoted until they reach their position of incompetence. That is to say, any worker will continue to be promoted as long as they demonstrate competency. But sooner or later, that worker will end up with a job that is beyond his or her abilities, and they will remain there indefinitely. The whole story begins with people who do their jobs well being put forward for positions of greater responsibility. For example, a good machinist becomes team leader, but it turns out that he is not a good manager of people and hates dealing with paperwork. He is not demoted back to simple machinist again, as this would require his management acknowledging their mistake. This is the story of how a good machinist becomes a poor team leader. Here is another example. A smart young chap starts an apprenticeship in a garage. He does a great job, and the fellow is certified as a mechanic. Again, he shows talent and learns to rapidly detect faults and expertly correct them. So, he is made senior mechanic. Now his love for machines becomes an obstacle. He accepts every assignment without wondering if the shop is overloaded. He interferes in the work of his subordinates, allowing himself to be distracted from his core duties. You can never find him in the office. Usually, he is playing around with a dismantled engine, while the man supposed to be doing that job stands and watches as the rest of the team have a smoke while they wait for new instructions. As a result, the workshop is always overloaded with work, chaos reigns permanently, and jobs are often finished late. A competent mechanic became an incompetent manager. The same is true for the military. An exemplary soldier, for example, the first to run into battle, a talented sharpshooter, becomes a crappy sergeant because he does not know how to manage people. He only knows how to obey orders. While people are still making their way up this ladder, they are useful and valuable. But as soon as they get as high as they can go, it begins. And the same thing happens at the very top of the pyramid too. Let us take the example of a certain army general. His subordinates adored him, as he managed to keep chummy with all and sundry. He could curse as well as any veteran, and was as brave as any soldier who maintained a healthy contempt for the minor details of rules and regulations. He became a true inspiration for the troops. One day, he was made a field marshal, and that means politics, for which he has no understanding. He ended up fighting with everyone, and would end up locked in his quarters for weeks, upset and drinking. The management of military affairs slipped out of his hands to be picked up by his juniors. So promotion brought him to a position where he turned out to be incompetent. But even if a person is not lifted up the ladder by others, he does his best to climb upwards. Hospital orderlies want to be head surgeons. Drivers would love to be fleet managers. Actors graduate to directing and end up torturing viewers with unwatchable films. If only virtuoso violinists would just keep on playing, they'd do it so well. But no, they want to lead their own orchestra. How many musicians have buried their talents because they want to stand on the conductor's podium? Although, truth be told, some have done a good job as conductors, but others become bitter and vengeful, enraged by the fact that no one fully appreciates their genius. Thus we have it. As a result of promotion, a competent worker becomes incompetent. Sooner or later, this can happen to any employee in any hierarchy. They rise up, and when they get to the top, they start slowing the whole system down. However, it is fascinating to see how fast these incompetent workers make their way up the career ladder, as if pulled by invisible forces. But it turns out there are two different tools used to climb the mountain: elbows and hands. Elbows are applied to the bodies of one's coworkers to gain traction and push oneself ahead of the competition. Workers participate in all manner of training sessions, evening courses, and remote education, apply themselves to their work as well as possible. Coming into the office at daybreak and being the last to go home, this would appear to be the most reliable path, but it only seems so. Back in school, we knew where we stood. Some stood at the head of the class, and others trailed far behind. We knew who would make it to an Ivy League college, who would become a great writer. The guy we all copied our math homework from could hardly fail to go into applied math. But how did we all end up? The math whiz is working as a chef. The writer spends his days on the assembly line. If you don't count a handful of articles he wrote for the local newspaper, scoops from the factory floor. The boy who dreamed of becoming a diplomat ended up a penniless drunk, while the only success is the rascal who never got a decent grade. His high-placed uncle made him a big boss in some ministry. So, in actual fact, if you want to get on in life, it is better not to use your elbows, but your hands, or rather the hands of friends in high places. Ideally, helping hands should be attached to extremely successful relatives, school friends, lovers, then your ascension will be faster. If not, then you can wear yourself out trying to please the boss, flattering him in the office and on the golf course, bringing him symbolic gifts of rare whiskeys. To what end? The helping hand of an incompetent boss is usually held out to an equally incompetent employee, simply because the former feels so much more comfortable, at ease, in the company of the latter company. According to the axiom coined by another clever chap, Cyril Parkinson, an official wants to multiply subordinates, not rivals. Have you ever noticed that some bosses occasionally need urgent medical attention? They are always getting migraines or asthma or mysterious attacks and seizures. Did you think it was because of their extreme workload? Or their stressful lifestyle? If only. This is the same illness that strikes everyone in that position, last stop syndrome. This is a disease that kicks in at the very moment that a boss comprehends he can no longer move forward, and neither is he capable of doing the work given to him. He feels he simply lacks the requisite energy or intelligence. Actually, he has just reached his zone of incompetence. It is easy to see when a person has last stop syndrome. For example, when you hear him say something like, "If only I could stop these headaches, I could concentrate on my work." Or, "If I could only get my digestive system under control." Or, "All I really need is a good night's sleep." This disease has spread like a pandemic amongst bosses of all shapes and sizes. And what do you think the answer is? Well, it turns out that multiplication is the remedy. Bosses love multiplying anyway, creating all kinds of new departments, committees, and units. As Cyril Parkinson wrote, committees are living organisms. They grow, develop, and then produce the seeds of a whole generation of new committees. This is how real-world workers turn into clots in the bureaucratic blood system that prevent the system from developing. Yet they all know how to pretend to look smart, writing papers and even books, defending their thesis and dissertations. Any management system will be chock full of these parasites, each preventing the right person from doing their job. And when it becomes absolutely evident that such a worker is a waste of space, people may even start asking how to get rid of him. But how? He is already a part of the machine. At this point, one of the so-called fake expulsions comes into play. For example, sideways promotion. If he can't manage this department, let's try him out on the one next door. And here's another option, the turbo boost. Let's recommend him for further promotion. As head of the department, he was hopelessly inept, putting a spanner in the work of whatever he touched. And any way to get rid of him must be good. Better to kick him upstairs than to have him blocking our path. What will happen to him later? That is the least of our worries. He will end up in some committee on social affairs or the Ministry for Culture, and why not? It is not as if that would be the first such case. On the other hand, these people are eventually overtaken by the feeling that they do actually have the right to think for themselves and take decisions on behalf of everyone else. Subordinates who are then obliged to obediently accept and implement their decisions. Still, they want to live in sufficiency and stability, which means that they need subordinates, helpers, who can help to support that abundance. An incompetent boss will intuitively select people who are equally incompetent, who accept every word as gospel, who execute his every command, and reinforce the status quo, as they say, followers make leaders. Yet the higher an inept employee advances up the career ladder, the more harm he can do. The reader will already be aware that if such a promotee sends the wrong message down the height of his position, then the whole hierarchy can start moving in the wrong direction, with every department, committee, and team, every worker, contractor, and employee wasting their time and stumbling over each other. So what are we left with? A huge number of incompetent people that gradually percolate ever higher. Some of them hide behind the appearance of intense activity, shouting loudly and promoting new ideas, trying to convince themselves of their own competence. Or perhaps they really do believe that they are professionals, filled as they are with the sense of their own significance. After all, as Charles Darwin wrote, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. But to be able to manage people, a person has to have some special training and experience. In the ancient world, people would be prepared from childhood to occupy high positions. But that college dropout and leader of the world's proletariat, Vladimir Lenin, said, "Any cook can govern the state." And apparently, Lenin's slogan was taken as a call to arms in many countries where we continue to see power in the hands of failed artists, or individuals who somehow never completed their educations as teachers, engineers, bus drivers, dentists. And this is why the countries where they come to power are in the state they are in. But where did they come from, these brainless arm wavers? There's nothing to prove their skills. They were squeezed upward by the unthinking crowd. The desires of the crowd somehow always lead to the formation of a hierarchical system. But because these fake pharaohs never managed to create anything positive in the economy, in science, or in politics, they compensated for the lack of skills with aggressive activity. They invented military conflicts, show trials, and random festivities. The saving grace of democracy is that every reign comes to an end and is replaced. This is a good thing, because the longer a person is in power, the more accustomed he becomes to the idea that he is an untouchable ruler, a god. But around that head of state, a bubble inevitably forms and then grows. It absorbs the media, art, literature, and television. All those areas are where there is no clear definition of competency. If you work on an assembly line, everyone can see how well you do your job. But if your job is to offer a subjective opinion in the media, it is impossible to determine how good you are. 80% of them are fakes, pretenders. It is simply amazing. What a colossal number of imposters manage to convince us that they are geniuses, destined for greatness. They come up with the most amazing plans and projects, endless dubious inventions and suspicious ideas. They publish tons of books, shoot thousands of films, and record millions of songs. But out of all of this, maybe 5% is worth something, or perhaps even less. What happens on television, meanwhile, is simply beyond belief. Apart from mindless distraction and sports programs, there is nothing but pseudo-scientific documentaries, endless conversation between eggheads. All these political scientists, analysts, experts, and consultants, opinion leaders, and influence managers who never leave the TV screens, giving advice on any issue that comes to mind, from finances to the economy, from medicine to politics, Who are all these people? Who are these pundits, experts, and interviewees who shuffle endlessly from one show to another? It is strange, but we feel confident to judge people based on what the television shows us of them. But we never even met any of them. Have you ever met a head of state, for example? Or any of the fiery figures in the opposition? Or indeed, anyone else from the river of faces bobbing into the vision on the small screen? No? But you have already formed your opinion of them. And based on what? It is no more than a shadow theater. So what do we have? Here is a whole circle of people, cultural figures, the media, TV, and on, who actively create and shape public opinion, who zombify the public, so that the people continue to live in this hierarchical system of incompetency. The very idea sent shivers up my spine. So this is where I turn my thoughts in a more positive direction. After all, there must still be a small minority of people who really do stuff, real work, with real results. After all, we are still in motion.
Somehow,
It seems to me that this motion is produced by those who have not yet reached the level of their incompetency.
me, I try for all
Who knows what the world would look like if every man and woman performed just that one function that he or she was destined to perform, if everyone did the work they were meant to do, if everyone did work that matches their skills and they stuck to their music in this huge orchestra of humanity.
other folk thrive.
What a glorious world that would be, where everyone would be in his rightful place. But this would be the theme of a film in a very different genre. Fantasy or science fiction, perhaps?
The day of my birth, I've been a stranger on